The sun was beating down on the quiet suburban street, a perfectly ordinary afternoon. Officer Miller leaned against his patrol car, watching his new K-9 partner, Rex, a sharp-eyed German shepherd. Rex was usually calm, focused, but today was different. His attention was locked onto a woman walking slowly down the sidewalk, one hand resting gently on her noticeably pregnant belly. As she drew closer, Rex began to whine, a low, anxious sound deep in his throat. Officer Miller gave the leash a gentle tug. "Easy, boy. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. The woman offered a small, tired smile as she passed, and that's when Rex erupted. He wasn't aggressive, not in the way he was trained to be with suspects. This was different, a frantic, desperate barking, pulling with all his strength toward her, his eyes wide and pleading. The woman looked startled, then nervous. "I'm sorry, he just doesn't like me," she mumbled, quickening her pace. Officer Miller apologized, his face flushing with embarrassment. He wrestled the dog back, scolding him firmly. What was wrong with him? Rex was a professional, not some jumpy pet. He'd never seen him act like this. But as the woman hurried away, a cold knot tightened in Officer Miller's stomach. Rex wasn't trying to attack. The dog was trying to tell him something. He was trying to warn him. And that's when he saw it, the tiniest flicker of movement beneath the woman's loose summer dress, not a kick from a baby, but something else, something shifting and solid. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and his blood ran cold. By the time he shouted for her to stop, his heart hammering against his ribs, it was already too late. The woman, whose name was Sarah, didn't stop. At the sound of Officer Miller's shout, a jolt of pure adrenaline shot through her. She didn't look back. Instead, she broke into a clumsy, panicked run, one arm wrapped protectively, desperately, around her middle. The weight she carried was immense, and it wasn't the gentle, rounded weight of a child. It was a solid, blocky burden, strapped tightly to her torso under the flowing fabric of her dress. Every step was a jarring reminder of what was hidden there. Rex was a frenzy of motion, his barks now sharp, commanding pulls on the leash. Suspect fleeing on foot. Miller yelled into his radio, his own heart thundering as he gave chase. His mind was racing, trying to piece it together. The dog's behavior, the woman's unnatural gait, the way her pregnancy didn't move like a living thing. It was all wrong. He'd heard stories, of course, training videos about smugglers and couriers using creative methods, but he'd never seen it, never faced it in his quiet district. Sarah's breath came in ragged sobs. She could hear the officer's heavy footfalls closing in, the frantic barking of the dog echoing in the quiet street. Her vision blurred with tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had promised it would be easy. A simple walk, just a pregnant woman taking a stroll, and $5,000 would be hers. Enough to finally get her little brother out of the trouble he was in, enough to make the men who were threatening him go away. He had told her the package was just high-end electronics, untaxed goods. But now, with this police dog going crazy, with the raw fear in the officer's voice, she knew with a sickening certainty that he had lied. Officer Miller was younger, fitter, and he caught up to her quickly. "Ma'am, stop right there." "Police," he commanded, his voice firm but laced with a tension he couldn't hide. He reached for her arm, and she stumbled, falling against a parked car with a soft cry. Rex was right there, not biting, not attacking, but pressing his nose insistently against the hard, unyielding curve of her false belly, whining and scratching at the fabric with his paw. "Please," Sarah whispered, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Please, I needed the money." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Miller instructed, his training kicking in even as his mind reeled. He called in a location, his voice tight, requesting backup and an ambulance, just in case. He kept his eyes on her, on the strange, rigid shape of her midsection. He didn't know what was in there, but if it was what he feared, if it was explosives or something worse, a wrong move could be catastrophic. The quiet street was no longer quiet. Curtains twitched in nearby windows. The ordinary day had shattered. He had to secure her. With careful, deliberate movements, his own hands trembling slightly, he guided her to sit on the curb. Rex remained fixated, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest, his entire body tense. The dog knew. He had known from the very beginning. Miller felt a surge of gratitude for his partner, mixed with a deep, chilling dread. This was Rex's first real test outside of training, and he had been more perceptive than is human. "Tell me what's under your dress," Miller said, his voice lower now, trying to project calm. "What did they have you carry?" Sarah just shook her head, weeping silently. She was trapped, caught between the law and the dangerous men who had sent her on this errand. If she talked, what would they do to her brother? The man's threat had been clear: one word to anyone, and you'll be picking up what's left of him in a bag. The weight against her skin felt like it was burning, a ticking time bomb of consequences. The wail of sirens grew in the distance, first one, then several, converging on their location. Soon, the street would be swarming with more officers, detectives, maybe even the bomb squad. The situation was escalating far beyond a simple strange encounter. Officer Miller kept his position, a solid, nervous presence between Sarah and the rest of the world, his hand resting on Rex's head for comfort as much as for control. He looked at the terrified young woman, at the desperate, intelligent animal, and at the hidden threat between them. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a heavy, waiting fear. They were all waiting now, waiting for the experts, waiting for the truth to be revealed, waiting to see if the desperate barks of a police dog had been a warning they had almost failed to hear in time. The real danger, he sensed, was only just beginning. The sirens screamed into a crescendo, and then the street was full of noise and movement. 2 more patrol cars skidded to a halt, their lights painting the houses in frantic flashes of red and blue. Officers took up positions, their voices sharp and clear, creating a perimeter that pushed the curious neighbors further back. The world had shrunk to this single patch of curb, the weeping woman, and the anxious dog. A senior detective, a man named Grayson with a weary face and calm eyes, arrived and took charge with a quiet authority. He listened as Officer Miller, his words tumbling out quickly, explained everything: Rex's unusual behavior, the desperate barking, the unnatural shape beneath the dress. Grayson's eyes never left Sarah. He saw the real terror there, the kind that went deeper than just getting caught by the police. "Son," Grayson said to Miller, his voice low, "you and your dog may have just saved a lot of people today." He then knelt down, keeping a respectful distance from Sarah. "My name is Detective Grayson. I need you to listen to me very carefully. We need to know what is strapped to you. Is it on a timer? Is there a trigger?" Sarah could only sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. She hugged her middle, but it was a protective gesture born of fear, not motherhood. They said they'd hurt my family." Across town, in a sparse apartment that smelled of stale cigarettes, a man named Leo watched the live news feed on his phone. A local reporter, standing just beyond the police tape, was already talking about a major police incident, a possible bomb threat, and a female suspect. Leo's blood ran cold. It was her. The idiot girl had gotten herself caught. He threw the phone against the wall, the screen shattering. This was a mess. A huge, unpredictable mess. The package wasn't just contraband, it was a prototype, a new design his employers were moving across the city. It was supposed to be untraceable, silent. Now it was on every news channel. He had to call it in, and he knew the reception wouldn't be good. His hand trembled as he reached for a burner phone, already imagining the cold, furious voice on the other end. Back on the street, the bomb squad had arrived, 2 figures in heavy, intimidating suits that made them look like astronauts. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose that was more terrifying than any rush. One of them approached Sarah while the other brought over a large, reinforced container. "Ma'am," the bomb tech's voice was muffled but gentle through his helmet. "We're going to help you. But you have to be perfectly still for me. Can you do that?" Officer Miller held Rex's leash tightly, the dog now quiet but trembling with a coiled energy. He watched as the tech carefully, so carefully, used a pair of shears to cut through the fabric of Sarah's dress. The false pregnancy belly was revealed not as a simple pillow, but as a complex harness made of canvas and straps, holding a dense, rectangular block wrapped in dark gray plastic. Wires, thin and colored, snaked from one end into a small, separate electronic device taped to the side. It was real. It was a bomb. A collective hush fell over the officers nearby. The only sound was Sarah's ragged breathing and the distant whir of a news helicopter that had now appeared in the sky above. The bomb tech examined the device, his head tilted. No obvious external timer, he reported over his comms. Could be remote triggered. We need to get it off her and into the containment vessel. Now. The next few minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She felt the tech's hands working deftly at the straps, loosening the terrifying weight that had been her constant companion for the last hour. She felt a wave of dizzying relief as the harness was lifted away, followed immediately by a fresh wave of terror. They had it. But the men who gave it to her were still out there. They knew where she lived. They knew where her brother, Mark, was. As the bomb was carefully sealed inside the thick-walled container and wheeled away to a remote field for a controlled disruption, Detective Grayson helped Sarah to her feet, draping a blanket over her shoulders. She was no longer a suspect in his eyes, she was a victim, a pawn in a much darker game. "Who gave this to you, Sarah?" Grayson asked, his voice soft but insistent. "Who are you supposed to meet?" Before she could answer, an officer handed Grayson a file. Inside was a driver's license photo. It was Sarah's brother, Mark. His record was clean, but a note attached, from a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, stated he was a person of interest in a large-scale fraud investigation, deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. Sarah saw the photo and her composure broke completely. "It's Mark, isn't it? They have him. The man, he said if I didn't do this, they'd kill him. He said they were watching my apartment, that they'd know if I talked to the police." Her eyes darted around wildly, scanning the rooftops, the crowd, looking for a face that shouldn't be there. Leo, from his wrecked apartment, made the call. The voice on the other end was indeed cold and furious. The instructions were simple and brutal. The package was compromised. The courier was a liability. And the brother, the leverage, was now a loose end. They had to be cleaned up. The operation was more important than their lives. As Detective Grayson led a shaking Sarah towards his car, promising her protection, promising to find her brother, neither of them knew that a different kind of timer had just started. A man in a nondescript sedan was already pulling up outside a shabby apartment building across the city, his purpose clear and his intentions final. The immediate danger in the quiet suburb had been contained, but the true, human cost of the conflict was only now beginning to unfold. The inside of the unmarked police car was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left. Sarah sat huddled under the scratchy wool blanket, her tears finally drying into a cold, numb fear. Detective Grayson navigated the traffic, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, watching for any car that seemed too interested in theirs. "We're going to a safe location first," Grayson said, breaking the silence. "Then we'll put everything we have into finding your brother. I need you to tell me everything you remember about the man who gave you the package. Anything at all." Sarah took a shaky breath. "He was average." His voice was calm, too calm. "He knew things about me, about Mark. He said Mark had taken money from the wrong people. He said this one job would clear the debt." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to picture his face, but it was just a blur. "He drove a white van. I didn't see the license plate. It was just a white van." It felt hopelessly inadequate. At that moment, Grayson's phone buzzed. He put it on speaker. It was Officer Miller, his voice tight with excitement. "Detective, we have something. A traffic camera a block over from where we apprehended the woman caught a white van leaving the area in a hurry right after the siren started. The plate is muddy, but we're running partials now." A flicker of hope, thin and fragile, sparked in Sarah's chest. Maybe they could find them. Maybe there was still time. Across the city, that hope was a currency that had already expired. The man in the sedan, who went by the name Cale, stood outside Mark's apartment door. He didn't bother knocking. A few deft moves with a lockpick and he was inside, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click. The apartment was dark, the blinds drawn. A young man, Mark, was tied to a chair, his face pale and streaked with tears. Another man, the one who had been guarding him, looked up, his expression nervous. The girl was caught. "Cops have the package," Cale said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He pulled out a silenced pistol. "The boss says this is a cleanup. No witnesses." Mark's eyes widened in pure terror, a muffled scream caught in the gag over his mouth. The other guard looked shocked. "Whoa, Cale, we were just supposed to watch him." "Plans change," Cale said, raising the weapon. Back in the car, Grayson's phone rang again. This time, it was the financial crimes detective. "Grayson, we got a hit on that fraud case." One of the names that came up is a known associate of a crew that deals in high-stakes smuggling and intimidation. A real nasty piece of work named Leo. "We have a last known address." He relayed the information, the same apartment building Cale had just entered. Grayson's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. "That's our target. Miller, I'm sending you the address. I'm 5 minutes out with the sister. I need every available unit to converge, but tell them no sirens. We do this quiet. We don't know what we're walking into." Sarah heard the address and her blood turned to ice. "That's Mark's building," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's where he lives." The fragile hope shattered, replaced by a dread so profound it stole her breath. They weren't just going to find the men, they were going to where her brother was being held. And they were already too late. Inside the apartment, Cale's phone vibrated. It was a single-word text from a lookout, "Police." He cursed, lowering the gun. They were out of time. "Forget him. We go. Now." He and the other man moved quickly towards the fire escape, leaving Mark tied to the chair, alive but still in mortal danger, the sound of their retreat echoing in the silent room. As Grayson's car screeched to a halt a block away from the building, he could see Officer Miller's patrol car already there, lights off. Miller and Rex were out, taking cover behind the car door. Rex was growling again, a low, vicious sound, his body pointed straight at the apartment building. He could smell the fear, the violence, lingering in the air. "He's here," Miller said, his voice a tense whisper over the radio. "Rex knows it. The threat is inside." Grayson turned to Sarah, his face grim. "You stay in this car. You do not get out, no matter what you see or hear. Do you understand me?" She nodded, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails dug into her palms. Grayson drew his service weapon and moved to join Miller. Together, with Rex leading the way, a focused and deadly arrow of tension, they approached the building's main entrance. The front door was slightly ajar. A bad sign. Above them, from the fire escape on the third floor, they heard the metallic clang of footsteps running. The suspects were fleeing, but was Mark still inside? Was he even alive? Rex, without a command, lunged forward into the dim lobby, his nose to the ground, tracking the freshest, most potent scent of fear and guilt. He led them straight to the stairwell, his claws scrabbling on the concrete steps as he charged upward, pulling Miller behind him. The climax was here. They were seconds away from the apartment door, seconds away from discovering the terrible truth left in the wake of the white van, the truth that would decide whether Sarah's desperate gamble had saved her brother, or doomed them both. The silence in the stairwell was broken only by their ragged breathing and the frantic scrabble of Rex's claws on the concrete. The dog was a force of nature, pulling Officer Miller up the steps, his entire being focused on the scent he was chasing. Detective Grayson was right behind them, his gun held ready, his heart hammering against his ribs. The metallic clangs from the fire escape were fading. The suspects were getting away, but Rex wasn't following them. He was leading them straight to apartment 3B. Miller didn't hesitate. At the door, he gave a sharp command. "Rex, Revere." the German Shepherd exploded into action, his powerful body slamming against the cheap wooden door. The frame splintered with a sickening crack and the door flew inward, banging against the wall. Miller and Grayson surged in after him, weapons sweeping the room. The scene was stark and horrifying. A young man, Mark, was duct-taped to a dining chair, his head lolling forward. He was terrifyingly still. But Rex didn't go to him. Instead, the dog skidded to a halt in the center of the room, his barking ceasing abruptly. He lowered his head, sniffing at a small, black device left on the floor. It was a cell phone, but it was wired strangely, with a single, ominous red light blinking rhythmically on its screen. "Bomb!" Grayson yelled, his voice cracking with a fear he'd never known. "It's a secondary device. Get back!" They both scrambled backward, pulling a confused and resistant Rex with them, their minds reeling. This wasn't an escape, it was a trap. The men had fled, knowing the police would come straight to this location. They had left a calling card. From the shattered doorway, a weak voice croaked. "It's a countdown." Mark was alive. His eyes were open, wide with a terror that mirrored their own. He nodded weakly towards the phone. He said you'd come. He said it was a message." Grayson's eyes locked on the phone. The red light wasn't just blinking. With each pulse, a number decremented on the screen, 059. 058. Less than a minute. There was no time for the bomb squad. No time for a controlled disruption. They were in a densely populated apartment building. The evacuation wouldn't be possible in under a minute. Down in the car, Sarah was watching, waiting, completely unaware that the brother she had risked everything for was at the epicenter of a new, more immediate nightmare. Miller's training screamed at him to retreat, to get as far away as possible. But looking at Mark, tied and helpless, and thinking of Sarah waiting in the car below, he couldn't. Rex was whining, pawing at the device, not with aggression, but with a strange, focused intensity, as if he was trying to understand it, to stop it. "Can we move it?" Miller shouted to Grayson, his voice tight. "With what?" "We don't know if it's pressure sensitive or on a motion trigger. One wrong move and we're all gone." Grayson's mind raced, the numbers ticking down relentlessly. 045, 044. It was then that Rex did something extraordinary. He stopped pawing and instead, with a surprising gentleness, he picked up the wired phone in his mouth. "Rex, no!" "AUS!" Miller commanded, panic seizing him. But the dog didn't drop it. He held it carefully, his body tense. He then trotted, not towards the open window or the door, but towards the small, tiled bathroom. He pushed the door open wider with his nose and disappeared inside. Miller and Grayson stared, frozen in disbelief. They heard a soft, clattering sound, followed by the distinct, faint noise of something being submerged in water. The countdown on the device, now hidden from view in the bathroom, was at 015. A profound, deafening silence fell over the apartment. Grayson didn't wait. He rushed to Mark and started frantically cutting the duct tape with his pocket knife. Miller stood poised in the hallway, his eyes fixed on the bathroom door, his service weapon aimed, ready for an explosion that would end them all. The numbers in his mind hit 0. There was no blast. No fire. No shattering of the world. Only a soft, fizzing sound, like a firework dud, came from the bathroom, followed by the smell of burnt electronics and the steady, dripping of water. Rex emerged from the bathroom, his fur soaked and dripping. He shook himself off, then sat down, looking up at Miller with intelligent, waiting eyes, as if to say, "What's next?" The immediate threat was neutralized. But the shock of it, the sheer, impossible luck of a dog understanding water could short-circuit a device, left them breathless. They had survived the trap, but the men who said it were still out there. And now, they knew one thing for certain, this was no longer just about smuggling or debt. This was a declaration of war, and the police had just become the primary targets. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the water dripping from Rex's fur onto the floorboards. The silence was heavier, more profound, than any explosion could have been. Then, chaos erupted into action. Grayson finished cutting Mark free, and the young man collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief and shock. Miller rushed into the bathroom. The wired phone was sitting at the bottom of the toilet bowl, its screen dark, a few tiny bubbles rising to the surface. It was dead. He scooped it out with a gloved hand, his own hands trembling not with fear now, but with a staggering awe for his partner. Down in the car, Sarah saw the paramedics rushing into the building and, unable to bear it any longer, she burst from the car and sprinted inside, a uniformed officer barely catching up to her. She reached the apartment just as they were bringing Mark out on a stretcher. The siblings' eyes met, and a silent, powerful understanding passed between them. The nightmare was over. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The bomb squad confirmed the device in the phone was a crude but powerful incendiary, designed to trigger a flash fire. Rex's instinct to submerge it had saved everyone in the apartment. He was a hero. Across the city, the partial license plate from the traffic camera led to an abandoned warehouse. Inside, they found the white van, wiped clean, and evidence of the bomb-making. Leo and Cale had vanished, their identities ghosts. A week later, the story had cooled. Mark and Sarah were in a secure safe house, beginning the long process of putting their lives back together under witness protection. Officer Miller and Rex were being honored in a small ceremony at the precinct. Rex, wearing a new leather collar, sat patiently, accepting pats and a shiny new badge for his harness. It was as Miller was driving home that evening, the city lights beginning to glow in the dusk, that he noticed it. Rex, who was usually calm and observant in the back seat, suddenly sat up. His ears pricked forward, and a low, familiar whine built in his throat. He wasn't looking out the window at the passing streets. He was staring intently at the police radio mounted on the dashboard. Miller frowned. "What is it, boy? You hear something?" The whine grew more anxious. Rex pawed at the mesh divider, his focus absolute. A routine dispatch crackled over the radio, a unit responding to a noise complaint. Rex's reaction didn't change. Then, a different officer's voice came through, older, slightly gruff, reporting he was clear from a minor fender bender. And Rex began to bark. That same desperate, frantic barking he had used on Sarah. A cold knot tightened in Miller's stomach. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, his heart starting to pound again. He looked at the radio, then at his dog. The officer who had just spoken was a 20-year veteran, a man everyone respected. A man named Detective Grayson. The pieces, the unthinkable pieces, began to click into place. Grayson had been there from the start. He had taken charge so quickly. He had access to all the information, knew every move they were making. He was the one who had insisted on taking Sarah alone to the safe location. He was the one who had received the address from Mark's apartment, the trap they had almost walked into. Rex wasn't barking at a noise. He was barking at a voice. A voice he had heard, calm and authoritative, in that room before the bomb was ever placed. The man wasn't just on the police radio, he was part of the conspiracy. Miller stared at his partner in the rearview mirror, the hero dog who had saved them all not once, but twice. The case was closed for everyone else, but for them, a new and more dangerous investigation had just begun, and the enemy was closer than anyone could have ever imagined. The car idled at the curb, the cheerful sounds of the city outside a stark contrast to the cold dread filling the inside of the patrol car. Miller's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He looked at Rex in the rearview mirror, the dog's intense focus still locked on the now silent radio. Grayson. It was impossible, and yet, it made a terrible kind of sense. Who better to run an operation than the man in charge of dismantling it? He had controlled the narrative from the second he arrived on the scene. Miller knew he couldn't trust anyone at the precinct. If Grayson was dirty, he wouldn't be working alone. A direct accusation would get him nowhere, and would likely put Sarah, Mark, and himself in even greater danger. He had to be smarter. He had to have proof. He drove home, his mind racing. He lived in a small, quiet house on the edge of town. Once inside, he pulled out his personal laptop, avoiding his police-issued one completely. He started with what he knew for sure, Rex's reaction. The dog's sense of smell was beyond question. He had linked Grayson's scent to the bomb, meaning Grayson had been in that apartment, or had handled the components, before it was ever strapped to Sarah. Over the next few days, Miller played his part. He attended the follow-up briefings, accepted the accolades with a forced smile, and acted as if the case was neatly wrapped up. But he was watching. He noticed how Grayson always subtly steered the investigation away from any deeper financial trails. He saw how the lead on the white van had conveniently gone cold despite a partial plate. Grayson was like a gardener, carefully pruning any branch of the investigation that might grow back towards him. Miller's only confidant was Rex. He started taking him on walks near Grayson's home, a nice, unassuming house in a good neighborhood. He never got too close, just let Rex get a firm fix on the scent. On their third visit, Rex's behavior changed. As they passed a public storage facility a mile from Grayson's house, Rex froze. He pulled Miller towards a specific unit, a large, roll-up door numbered 214, and let out that same low, urgent whine. This was it. The place where the evidence had to be. But Miller was just one man. He needed help he could trust absolutely. He thought of Sarah and Mark, still in protective custody. He managed to get a secure message to Sarah through the federal marshal overseeing their case, a man named Evans who was outside the local department's chain of command. He kept it vague, asking if Grayson had ever done or said anything that struck her as odd. Sarah's reply, passed back through Marshal Evans, was a thunderbolt. She described how, in the car after her arrest, Grayson had been kind, reassuring. But he had asked one strange question. He had asked if the man in the white van had given her anything else, like a key. She'd said no, and he dropped it. A key. A key to a storage unit. That was the confirmation Miller needed. He laid everything out for Marshal Evans, Rex's reactions, the storage unit, Grayson's suspicious steering of the investigation. Evans, a serious man with a reputation for integrity, was initially skeptical. A dog's testimony wouldn't hold up in any court. But the pieces fit a pattern he didn't like. He agreed to help, but they had to do this by the book to make any arrest stick. They obtained a warrant based on Rex's alert and the suspicious financial activity Miller had quietly documented, large, unexplained deposits in an account linked to a shell company that, with some digging, was connected to Grayson's brother-in-law. The raid happened at dawn. Miller and Rex waited with Evans and a team of federal marshals as the storage unit manager opened door 214. The light from the open door fell on the white van, its license plate a perfect match to the traffic camera's partial. Inside were boxes of cash, detailed ledgers of the smuggling operation, and, most damningly, a second, identical burner phone, pre-wired for another incendiary device, tucked away in the glove compartment. It was a treasure trove of evidence. Grayson was arrested at his desk in the precinct, a cup of coffee halfway to his lips. The look on his face wasn't one of anger, but of sheer, stunned disbelief. He had planned for everything, every possible variable. Except for a police dog with a nose for the truth and a rookie officer who had learned to listen to his partner. The fallout was immense. The corruption scandal rocked the department. Leo and Cale were eventually tracked down and arrested, their testimonies confirming Grayson was the mastermind, the silent partner who used his badge to protect the operation and eliminate competition. A few months later, under a clear blue sky, Miller and Rex were in a park. Sarah and Mark, their new identities finalized, had come to say goodbye before they moved to a new life far away. There were tears, but they were tears of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," Sarah said, hugging Miller tightly. She then knelt down and wrapped her arms around Rex, burying her face in his fur. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Rex licked her cheek, his tail wagging slowly. As they walked away, Miller sat on a park bench, Rex lying contentedly at his feet. He looked at his dog, this animal who had seen through lies that fooled everyone. It wasn't about fancy technology or brilliant detective work in the end. It was about trust. It was about a bond between a man and his partner, a bond built on listening, even when the only voice speaking was a desperate, honest bark. He rubbed Rex's head, knowing that as long as they were together, they would always find a way to bring the truth to light.